The strategic architecture of this confrontation became unmanageable in any traditional sense as soon as Qatar promised to retaliate militarily against Israel. Qatar is expected to support the United States. The biggest American military installation in the area is located there. Since the beginning of this war, it has been engaging in back-channel diplomacy on behalf of Washington. A gas installation that Qatar partially controls was bombed by Israel, Washington's closest military ally in the operation, that initiated all of this. Trump arrived, declared that it was the final instance of Israel's misbehavior and that it would not recur. The announcement came after Iran spent the next few hours explaining to Qatar exactly what it has been telling Gulf states since February 28, following Qatar's ultimatum. This is what we predicted would occur. There has never been a greater obvious contradiction at the heart of American strategy in this battle. America's most significant Gulf partner is being pushed by the nation waging this war on its behalf, in the direction of the nation that America is battling. Furthermore, Washington's response is a public pledge to maintain control over an ally that has consistently shown that it does not seek Washington's consent before taking action. Turn on notifications and sign up for From Report now. The oil price trend toward $200 per barrel, the Qatar-Israel breach, and the oil executive's ultimatum delivered inside the White House are all related. They tell the same tale. Additionally, appropriately combining them reveals some information about the location of this clash, heading that there isn't a formal briefing available at the moment. The White House meeting with senior executives from Exxon, Chevron, and Phillips 66, and representatives of the Trump administration merits more critical examination than has been done. Because it is not a market complaint when businesses that stand to gain from increased oil prices inform the president that things are getting out of control. It is a structural alert from the energy-savvy industry, more knowledgeable about economics than any government organization. The executives immediately informed the administration that the worst of the energy disruption was still to come, that the closing of the Hormuz, which affects around 20% of the world's oil traffic, will continue to cause instability, that costs will keep going up, and that the current escalation trajectory results in an outcome that is both beneficial for the business and detrimental to the economy on which it depends. That differentiation matters. Up until a certain point, when prices are high enough to permanently change consumer behavior rather than just boost income from current demand, oil firms profit from price hikes. Above that point, high costs hasten the shift away from fossil fuels, eliminate the discretionary expenditure that sustains the overall economy, and have political repercussions that lead to regulations that are worse for the sector than the initial market. Circumstances. The White House execs weren't whining about prices being too high for their quarterly profits. They were cautioning that prices were getting close to the point where the fossil fuel economy's structural base starts to permanently deteriorate. According to the U.S. Energy Secretary, he does not exclude oil prices rising to $200 per barrel. It has been 40 years since that level was last observed. Retail gas prices in the U.S. have nearly doubled to $200 per barrel from levels at the moment. Food prices, transportation costs, manufacturing costs, and the kind of persistent inflation that destroyed the political viability of a previous administration and produced the electoral outcome that brought the current administration to power are all increased as a result of the cascading effect through every supply chain that touches energy, which is every supply chain on Earth. The internal conflict at the core of American strategic decision-making is exposed by the Karg Island predicament. This conflict in a way that is too precise for the official framework. The vast majority of Iranian crude is transported to international markets via Karg Island, the country's main oil export terminal. Trump declared that the island had been hit by American forces. The analytically important detail is the operational reality of what was really hit. The island's military installations were targeted. The infrastructure for oil exports remained intact. The choice to target was not a mistake. It was a calculated decision motivated by the same reasoning that has limited American targeting choices during this war. At the same time as the Hormuz shutdown, the South Pass destruction, the Ras Laffan fire, and the drone attacks on Saudi refineries, destroying Iran's oil export capacity would remove a sizable amount of crude from international markets. The cumulative supply interruption that results from that combination would raise oil prices to a point where the oil executives would face serious economic repercussions, cautioned during the meeting in the White House. The point at which the global recession that Goldman Sachs forecast as a tail risk becomes a baseline scenario and consumer behavior permanently shifts. Since the start of the conflict, Iran has been aware of this limitation and has been systematically taking advantage of it. Iran's oil weapon is used whenever the U.S. and Israel are reluctant to attack Iranian oil infrastructure for fear of escalating the world's energy crisis, increases in strength. Iran's operational ability to continue the battle is maintained each time American forces attack military targets without destroying energy infrastructure. However, the message being conveyed to the world market is that the United States cannot fully pursue this war's energy component without destroying the global economy on which it depends. Iran's strategic planners based their response from the beginning on this contradiction. Iran is making use of its oil as a weapon. By showing the extent of what the United States is prepared to do to defuse that weapon, American military activities are increasing its effectiveness. Defense analysts and military theorists have chronicled this conflict's escalation trap with enough historical evidence that anyone who has studied how short-term military actions turn into long-term commitments should be familiar with its dynamics. The reasoning starts with the choice to use decisive action to improve a poor strategic scenario. Military action. Attack a military objective. Determine how the strike will affect the adversary's decision-making, and wait for the anticipated capitulation. The analysis finds that the strike was insufficient and that a larger strike will yield the intended outcome if the capitulation does not occur. Additionally, the larger strike does not result in surrender. The enemy modifies its strategy, strengthens its defenses, and offers a fresh set of targets that call for another attack, bigger than the previous one. For each subsequent attack to have the same operational and psychological impact as the one before it, more force is needed. The resolve to force increases. The exit becomes increasingly harder to locate, and the accumulating logic of escalation that has taken its place obscures the original objective, the precise, circumscribed goal that justified the initial strike. 500,000 American soldiers served in Vietnam as a result of this pattern. The trend that led to the commitment to Iraq is what lasted for 20 years, with an extra 2,500 Marines being deployed from the Indo-Pacific to join the existing force. The 50,000 Marines in the Gulf area are starting to mimic this pattern, not because the strategic position has improved, but rather because the escalation logic necessitates the employment of additional force to achieve the desired result that was not achieved by earlier force applications. The mechanism is accurately described in Robert Pape's explanation of the escalation trap. When an unfavorable status quo is contested with the reasoning behind the initial decision calls for escalation if the enemy reacts to decisive military action by altering tactics rather than surrendering. The failure of the preceding stage serves as justification for each escalation phase. To break free from this cycle, one must either accomplish the initial goal, which the 21-day operational record indicates is not imminent, or bear the political consequences of admitting that the goal cannot be accomplished using the current methods. At the moment, neither option is visible in the public image of the administration. This war is revealing a systemic weakness in the global energy systems that is not specific to the Middle East. Every business on the planet that has based its operations on the presumption that the physical infrastructure of the world's oil supply is steady, predictable, and shielded from precisely the kind of disruption that is currently taking place concurrently across numerous nodes faces this challenge. Oil is produced in Canada. Oil is produced in Mexico. Each nation establishes its own energy prices in relation to a worldwide market, whose benchmark prices are set by events in the Persian Gulf. It is not possible for a Mexican gas station to set its own fuel prices based on production costs in Mexico. The current conflict is pushing its prices toward $200 per barrel, which is dependent on global standards. The abundance of energy in Canada is not reflected in a Canadian consumer's heating bill. The Hormuz shutdown, the damage to South Pars, the Ras-Lufen fire, and the combined disturbance of the region on Earth with the highest concentration of energy production. Independence from energy. In the setting of a worldwide commodity market, the political narrative that every Western government has been selling its citizens for decades is untrue. It talks about manufacturing being self-sufficient, but it ignores the pricing system that establishes the production's value and the price that consumers must pay. Even if a nation produces all the oil it requires locally, it still has to pay the price on the international market, because it would be economically illogical for the producing companies involved in the market to sell it below the worldwide price. Canadian oil production is unaffected by the closing of Hormuz. The price that Canadians pay at the pump is determined by the global price at which that production is valued. The political framing of energy independence regularly fails to convey this aspect of the debate. That the global energy market's interconnectedness implies that cost, regardless of whether their nations have any oil ties to the Middle East, disruptions in the Persian Gulf affect household budgets in Toronto, Mexico City, Vancouver, and Veracruz. The price point at which consumers permanently alter their relationship with fossil fuels, rather than merely absorbing a temporary cost increase, is the strategic endpoint that neither the oil companies nor the Trump administration wants to reach, but that the present price trajectory is getting closer. For a sizable segment of the consumer market, the economic equation for buying a car is irreversibly altered when retail gas prices in the U.S. reach $7 per gallon, roughly twice current levels, commensurate with oil at $200 per barrel. The choice is no longer whether to pay more for petrol. The question then becomes whether switching to electric vehicles will completely eliminate fuel prices. That behavioral change doesn't go back once it happens on a large scale, when the price of oil drops. Purchasing decisions, infrastructural investments, and consumption patterns are all permanently altered. If the tariff hurdles prohibiting their import were lifted, the Chinese electric car market has created vehicles that are technologically competitive with American and European competitors at price points that would appeal to American buyers. China and Canada recently concluded trade agreements that lessened tariff barriers on Chinese electric automobiles. The irony: the oil industry executives seated in the White House were subtly admitting that the conflict, which is driving up prices and encouraging consumers to switch to electric vehicles, is also hastening the demise of the fossil fuel economic model, which was purportedly created to safeguard American strategic interests. Trump's energy dominance policy, which involves controlling oil and the geopolitical leverage it offers, is creating the exact pricing conditions that speed up the move away from reliance on oil. In the economies that are most important for the long-term demand picture, oil is becoming less significant due to the oil conflict. And no one is more aware of this than the businesses whose CEOs issued the White House warning. Because of this, their message was a warning about long-term structural repercussions, rather than a critique of short-term price volatility. The image that emerges from the KG Island paradox, the oil executive threat, and Qatar's military ultimatum. The official narrative of American strategic triumph in this battle is unable to limit the escalation trap mechanisms and the $200 oil trajectory. In response to an Israeli attack on Qatari-owned gas infrastructure, Qatar, which is home to the biggest American military base in the area, has threatened military action against Israel while engaging in American back-channel diplomacy and openly supporting the American-led initiative. Iran is communicating to Qatar what it has been communicating to other Gulf states. The Defense Rosafan and the Saudi refinery were not protected by Washington's promises, and they won't be protected in the future. Finding a compromise with Tehran that eliminates the targeting justification is the alternative to continuing to host the troops that make Qatar a target. The administration has received a private warning from the top executives in the American oil industry that the trajectory of energy disruption is beyond what the world economy can handle without creating catastrophic repercussions that are more detrimental to U.S. economic interests than Iran's military might. In response, the administration made a public pledge that Israel would never again attack Iranian energy infrastructure. A pledge to maintain control over an ally that has proven it can act independently on this conflict's most important military decisions. The price of oil is getting close to the point where it will permanently change consumer behavior in a way that hastens the fossil fuel economy's obsolescence. For the first time since 1973, every significant Gulf energy infrastructure node is currently under active threat because of the Hormuz closure, the South Par damage, the Ras Laffan fire, the Saudi refinery strikes, and the drone attacks on the Fujairah terminal. Real estate in Dubai has dropped by 30%. Gulf sovereign wealth funds, whose holdings are deeply ingrained in the American and European financial markets, are reevaluating risk in a way that, should they result in capital withdrawals, will have an impact on the world's financial markets that the present. The disruption of energy prices has not yet materialized, and the war, which was intended to last 72 hours, is now on day 21, with the escalation trap fully engaged, no declared goal accomplished, no obvious exit strategy, and the very companies who profit from fossil fuels informing the administration that things are going out of control. Turn on notifications and subscribe to the report. When a formal diplomatic reaction to Qatar's military ultimatum modifies the operating geometry of the US-based network, in the analysis of the Gulf will be presented. The study will be available when the escalation trap generates its subsequent iteration, which is when oil surpasses the price threshold that the oil executive warning designated as the structural danger point. The failure of the prior use of force justifies the additional force commitment. Here will be the analysis. Analysis comes after the evidence. What it always means to you. This comes from